Now we're going to start talking about something more interesting that we can do with MATLAB. And so we're going to start learning about loops. So there are a few types of loops that you deal with on a regular basis when you use MATLAB. So the first one is for loop. So I'll talk about for loops in this video. In the future videos I'll talk about while loops, forever while loops, and if else statements. So the general format for using for loops is as follows right here. So the first thing you write for your loop is the word for, and the last thing you write is end. So this is saying this is where I'm going to start and this is where I'm going to end. Now right next to for you have your condition. So it's generally something like k is equal to 1 through 100, increment by 1, or something similar to that. So at one point in time, k can be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 up to 100. And then inside the for loop, so this is the first line, and this is this last line right here. And in between that, you have a bunch of arguments, statements, and things of that nature. Now let's do so that's all for the format. Let's do a practice problem with it so we can learn how to use it in practice. So nothing too complicated. I like to use this example over and over because it's just really simple, so you can really focus on the concept instead of like thinking about how something else works. So you have, they're telling you that for x goes from 1 to 10, you want to find the corresponding y values, and then you want to use f-printfs and loops to print the table basically. We're already given the first two lines, so let's write our loop. So the first thing I do is write for, and then I go down here and I'll write end. So you know where you're starting and where you're ending. Now here we're told that we want to find y values for when x goes from 1 to 10. So you would say x is equal to 1 to 10. Then you go down here inside the loop and you write your line of code that says y is equal to x squared, because you want to find the corresponding y values. Now this is something that I think a lot of people miss, and it's that x and y in this case, they're scalars, they're not vectors. So what happens, the first thing that happens is MATLAB runs the code, goes up to this point right here, this gets to this line, it says alright, so we're gonna do a for loop. So it says okay, x at the first value x is going to take is 1. So we'll say alright, x is equal to 1. It will then penetrate the for loop, come down here, and they will say alright, so if x is 1, y is equal to x squared, so y is equal to 1. So now it will go back up here and it says alright, the last value I had for x was 1, so now I'm going to change it to 2. So it will say x is 2. Notice this is a scalar now. It's changing the value of x to 2. Then it penetrates the for loop again. It goes down here and it says alright, so if x is equal to 2, then my y has to be x squared, which is 4. Now it will go back up here. It will say alright, now I'll change x to 3. So now x is equal to 3, and it will come back down here and it will say alright, y is equal to 3 squared, which is equal to 9. So this is 9. It will keep doing that until it goes back up here and says alright, x is equal to 10. And it says alright, so if x is equal to 10, then y has to be equal to 100. So we'll say alright, y is equal to 100. And then it will try to go back up here again. It will say alright, I'm done, the highest value x can take is 10, and I'm done with that, so I'm going to kick out of the for loop, and it goes to this point, and then if you have code down here, it will run that code after that. So since our goal for this for this question, I guess practice problem, is to print a table, we will have to write f's inside of the for loop. So here the first two lines of the table are already given, so I'm not going to rewrite that. You would have to put them outside because or else it will print it every single time. So you put the first two parts of the table out here, and then inside here you would say fprintf, and then inside the fprintf you would say %5.2f. I think that's good increment. 5.2f, and then you can just say x comma y. Once again, you don't need to, since x and y are not they're not vectors, so you can just write x comma y. You don't have to try to transpose it because you really can't do it. It's a scalar, so you just write x comma y. So what I will do is, once it says okay, if x was 1, it will say y is 1. So this would be 1, 1. It will print the table like that, and it will keep doing that. It will keep printing it. So if you run this, if you save and run, you see that this is the, oh, I forgot to, alright, going to hide that. Alright, so if you run this, you see that you get the table you wanted. It prints x values and corresponding y values. So this is how you would use a for loop to print out values like this in a table. Now let's do another practice problem. Oh, so before we move on, what if you want y to be a vector? Then you don't need a for loop. Then you don't use a for loop. What you can do is simply x is equal to, or x1 is equal to 1 through 10, and y1 is equal to x dot to the power of 2. Notice how you have to do you have to use the dot operator here because x is a vector now. So you have to do x dot to the power of. Here x is not a vector, so you don't have to put the dot operator here. You can just do it. You can just say x to the second power. Okay. All right. So moving on from there. Next question, next practice problem question is, you have a sequence s sub n is equal to n plus 1 times 0.9 to the nth power. So notice this is just similar to, sequences are basically functions. So it's similar to saying f of x is equal to x plus 1 times 0.9 to the xth power. But since we're going to do for loops, I just wanted to let you know that you can do it as a function, but we're going to use for loops to do this problem. So our goal is to find corresponding s values for when n is equal to 1 through 100. So first thing, once again, what you would do is you would say for and end. So you know where you're starting, where you're ending. And then you know that for your n goes from 1 to 100, 1 to 100, and incrementing by 1. So you would say n is equal to 1 through 100. Then you will go down here inside the loop, and you will basically just write s sub n is equal to this whole thing right here. So I'm just going to copy and paste it. Alright. So what this will do is, first thing it will say, okay, now before I move on and explain you what the for loop does again, notice that n here has to start at 1, because in MATLAB, so when you have an array in MATLAB, it starts at the first position is 1, unlike Java and other coding languages where the first index is 0. MATLAB doesn't work like that. The first index is 1. So if you're writing a code like this, you have to start at 1. You have to start at 1. Now if you're saying that you want to start at 0, that's a solution to solve that. What you would do is you would say 0 here, right? So since you're decreasing n by 1 here, right? If you say 0, you have to add plus 1 here. Then what it will do is it will put the zero term in the first box, and then second box will be your first when n is equal to 1, and things like that. But for now, let's just keep it simple and do this, okay? So the first thing MATLAB does is after running code, it gets to this point right here. It says, all right, first thing I'm going to take is n is equal to 1. It will then penetrate the for loop, and it will say, okay, when n is equal to 1, s has some value. So this is what 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 times 0.9 to the nth power, right? So it will say, take the first entry in the array s is going to be when n is equal to 1. Then, so you have s sub 1, so the first entry in s is equal to 2 times 0.9 to the first power. Then it will go back up here. It will say, alright, now I'm going to change n is equal to 2. It will come back down here. It will say, alright, so 2 plus 1 is 3. 2 plus 1 is 3. And then 0.9 to the second power. You take this number, whatever this comes out to, and put it, since n is equal to 2, put it into the second, make it the second entry of the array s. And then you keep doing that until you get to n is equal to 100. Then you come down here and you say, alright, so s sub 100, so the 100th entry in the array s is going to be n plus 1, so that's 101, times 0.9 to the nth power, which is 100, so 0.9 to the 100th power. So if you run this code, if you run this for loop, you see that s is in fact a vector of size 100 by 1 times 100. So it has 100 values in it. So when you have n is equal to 100, you have the corresponding value of 0.0027. This comes out to 0.0027, and that gets placed into the last entry, so the 100th position in S. So that's for loops are pretty interesting, but they're pretty useless unless you use them with other loops. So later, after I'm done with while loops, for while loops, and if statements, I'm going to do a few practice problems that involve using a combination of all the loops. They're called nested loops, where you put one loop inside of another loop, and those have more applications, and those are the ones you'll use more often. But this was just to show you guys what for loops are. So yeah, thank you for watching. Hope it helped. See you guys next time.